5-Hour Energy helps you get through your crazy on-the-go life. And now it comes in 2 great tropical flavors, strawberry banana and tropical burst. They're delicious and can transport you to a tropical paradise. Try them both, then vote for your favorite at 5hewin.com. You could be on the go to someplace you actually want to go. Offer ends 7/31/20. Terms apply. See www.5hewin.com for details.
When I woke up this morning, I was feeling pretty dangerous.
All right, yeah, our roster looks great on paper. Whoop-de-hell. All right. But at the end of the day, we better be a good team. And you start building that during this time of the year.
Get your sorry ass up! Get your sorry ass up!
Doing a lot of talking with somebody that ain't do shit today. Doing a lot of talking.
Do you think you're better than Jarrell Revis is right now?
I'm better than you. My 24 years of life, I'm better at life than you.
Dave! Time to go to work!
Hey, 36! I ain't never seen you before, huh? Better go tell the coach you need some help. We gonna expose you, boy. All right, we coming at your ass.
Welcome to the Fantasy Football Roundtable.
Let's go! Let's go!
What's going on, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Football Roundtable Podcast, proud members of the Full-Time Fantasy Podcast Network. You can find them at FTFPodNet on Twitter. You can find me, your host, Matthew Burning, at SportsFanaticMB on Twitter. We are just one of a ton of great podcasts associated with this network, though, some of which are Jim Day of FF Champs, Corey Parsons and Dr. Roto from SiriusXM Radio, Mr. Bob Lung from the award-winning Fantasy Football Consistency Guide and the creator of the Midwest Fantasy Expo, Dwayne McFarland, Blake Sullivan, and a ton of great others, and you can find all of us on FullTimeFantasy.com, your one-stop shop for all of your fantasy news, advice, and strategies. We at the Roundtable are also excited to be partnering with ExpandTheBoxScore.com. You can find them at XTBoxScore on Twitter. They have some of the most advanced stats in football, baseball, basketball, and college football. College football stats are extremely hard to find. For just $15 a year, you can look at all of these. I'm telling you guys, it is well worth it. If you like to dive into the analytical side of sports I use it for prospects, college football prospects specifically, it is amazing. It goes down to the minutest of details in this stuff. And again, it's just $15 a year. If you use our code ROUNDTABLE, you will get 10% off of that, which is a steal of a deal, if I do say so myself, and probably the best deal in the industry. So definitely check them out, especially if you want to get a jump on the upcoming draft class. It'll be well worth your time and money. And we've got another great episode for you guys today. I'm excited Dennis and Matt are both back here. We'll be bringing them on here in just a second. They're both ready to hop on. We're going to talk a little bit about the XFL. Have Matt, who is, again, the XFL guru over there for the Fantasy Life app, does all their game reviews and previews. We'll have him break down what we saw out of Week 5. I got to attend a game, so I'll talk about that here in a minute with them as well, maybe. Then we're going to jump into the tight end free agents for 2020. Not a lot of studs, not a lot of guys to talk about, so we'll be just kind of focusing in on the top group of this tight end class. So let's jump them on here, and let's talk to them about XFL and the tight end free agents for 2020. Hello! And we've got the usual crew back with us. Mr. Dennis Bennett has jumped back on with us this week. He is back. We are excited to have him. You can follow him at culture_coach. Dennis, how you doing today?
You know, I'm just hanging out, drinking bleach, trying to keep myself clean.
Yeah, we don't want you to catch that coronavirus. And Mr. Matthew Fox is with us as well. You can follow him at Nighthawk7734 on Twitter. Mr. Fox, how are you doing with all the coronavirus and everything? You surviving up there in Colorado with no toilet paper?
Yeah, you know, I considered it one of my week's greatest accomplishments that I was able to get a pack of toilet paper at Walmart on Saturday. But also, you know, I was relieved this weekend went so well that you don't have to burn your DC Defenders gear.
I know, I just got to get myself a Tyree Jackson jersey now. It's my boy. I didn't even realize he was on that team. I'm not even going to lie. I had no idea, but I feel like Dennis can back me up on this. I don't think there was anybody tooting that dude's horn louder than me last season. So I'm excited to see if he gets a shot here with the Defenders.
Look,
I was beginning to wonder if you had adopted him.
Yeah. If you can get a quarterback that can throw for less than 40 yards in a game and actually win, that's a rare commodity.
Yeah, his arm was never his best quality, but yeah. And then, no, Dennis, I tried to adopt him, but he unfortunately declined my offer. I'm still not really sure why. He hasn't talked to me since, so I'm still a little upset about that, but I'm still going to support him and everything that he wants to do. The love doesn't just go away just because they say no to you. So I actually forgot kind of all about that. So why don't we get an update on what happened in Week 5? I was actually able, obviously, to go to one of the games. It sucked. I mean, the experience was awesome, but the game sucked. Give us a breakdown really quick of what happened in Week 5 of the XFL before we jump into free agency and the a tight end position for 2020.
Well, on Saturday, I think, we saw Houston continue to be the only undefeated team, 5-0. They actually benefited a little bit from what the XFL almost immediately admitted was an officiating mistake, and they actually demoted the official, which, you know what? I think we all understand that it's human nature that these kind of things have happened. The frustration I feel like with fans has been the lack of transparency and the lack of response from the NFL when everybody and their brother knows that there was a screw up. And I think people were kind of amazed at how refreshing it was to see this league say, hey, we totally screwed up. We screwed you out of a chance. We're not going to make a change because we're past that point, but we admit our mistake and the official that was in charge has been reassigned. If you told people that after some of the officiating things, like as somebody whose NFL team had not one but two dubious calls at the end of games that led to our 0-4 start for a season where we finished 7-9 and actually looked like we could have pushed for the playoffs at the end, that was kind of refreshing. But Houston looking pretty good. Seattle is still a team that, even though they are 1-4, I really like. I think they've had a terrible schedule and they've had terrible scheduling luck. And I think they are way better than their record, which is going to be interesting kind of going down the stretch because LA looked okay Sunday night. Dallas, I told you last week, you went to that game. My biggest concern was Week 1, their offense looked really bad when they didn't have Landry Jones, and then they had seemingly gotten themselves in a really good groove, and they had what I had thought was, at the time, the best game of the year playing against Houston before he got hurt, and I worried whether they could sustain some of that and could still keep in contention depending on how long Jones is out. I think we saw on Saturday they really got waxed by a Guardians team that has not been very good at times.
Yeah.
So that was kind of brutal. That kind of makes me think Dallas is in real trouble. Philip Nelson just, I think he threw it like 50 times and completed 30-something for 200 yards again. It's just their offense is not the same. Sunday's games, we were hoping the defenders would rally a little bit. They did. They were able to hold serve. They got the running game going. Their defense looked good. Were able to hold down the Battlehawks. Those teams are tied at 3-2. I think they're really sitting kind of tenuously right now atop the East, but right in their rearview mirror is Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay has been pretty good at times. They lost a tight one to LA on Sunday night, so it's going to be interesting to see, where they shake out. But at the midway point, it seems like Houston's really got it in the West, and then it's kind of wide open, and it's a toss up about who's going to chase them. No other team is even at 500. And at in the East, I was happy to see the Defenders win at home, and St. Louis is still there, kind of at the top. The East is going to be really interesting to play out the rest of the season.
Yeah, and this was their halfway point in the season, correct? They've only got the 5 more weeks before they hit the playoffs? Okay, cool. That's what I thought.
Yep, and we have 3. I mentioned this last Thursday, but I actually went and looked it up. The Thursday night games are the last 2 weeks of the season, April 2nd, regular season game, April 2nd and April 9th. And the first one is that rematch of Dallas and Houston. If Landry Jones is on the lower end of time he might miss, he could potentially be back. And I know the people on Fox have got to be kind of rooting because the Dallas team that we saw on Saturday is probably not what they're looking to put in primetime on a Thursday night football slot.
Yeah, it was. So I'll just give, if you follow me on Twitter, you saw me posting some pictures and everything. I mean, it was a lot of fun. Don't get me wrong. I don't know if this is going to be a fair comparison to make. I go to a lot of baseball games, and I kind of feel like that's what it was for me. Like, it was a lot of fun to watch. There was a lot of I was getting up and moving around with some friends. We actually moved to a different section where we were at. It was actually a lot colder than a lot of us expected, and we were sitting in the shade with, for any of you who don't know, again, baseball-wise, Globe Life Park was known as a kind of like a wind tunnel. And so once you get kind of in the shade and the wind's going, it gets pretty cold. So we actually moved to the bleachers, which were right by the sideline. Cam Jordan was there, which I did not know was reporting on the sideline. That was pretty cool. He was doing a lot of interacting with the fans and everything, during and while the game was kind of in intermission stuff. So that was a lot of fun. All in all, it was a great experience outside of the game, unfortunately. The game was just not good. I mean, I think it was... We left mid through the fourth quarter to go over to this really big bar they have there called Texas Live, and I think we left right after the Renegades returned a kickoff for a touchdown, and that was like right when all the action started picking up. Nelson had thrown a pick for a touchdown. The Renegades had scored a big touchdown. Like, they jumped up like 2 touchdowns on the Guardians jumped up 2 touchdowns on the Renegades quickly, and then they returned that touchdown, and it was just kind of one of those things where, Nelson is just not good, and so it was unfortunately probably the worst part about the whole experience was the game, but it was definitely fun. There's a shot that I might be going to that Thursday night game, so I'm interested in that. Hopefully I'm right there with Fox, and that I'm hoping that Landry Jones comes back, and it could be a more interesting game, but I thought it was a fun experience. So if you're around an XFL team and you have a shot to go to one, I would definitely recommend it. I know, like, for instance, St. Louis, Seattle, Washington, the stadium atmosphere is like all in. They describe it as like kind of like a soccer environment. It was a little bit like that at the Renegades game. It was not as packed as it has been, but I do think some of that has to do with the fact that Landry Jones is not there. But it was definitely a lot of fun, and I would recommend it.
The beer snake.
That was in
DC,
so I was not close to the beer snake at all.
Oh, they don't have one in every stadium?
Negative. I know.
DC is the one that's been real famous for that, doing the beer snake, and they were having a lot of fun. That was probably the game I watched the closest this weekend because I was interested in that matchup, and the timing on Sunday afternoon. It just feels right to come home and lay on the couch and find a football game.
So, did you watch the Sunday night game, Matt?
No,
I did not either.
Okay.
Yes.
I saw bits and pieces of it, but apparently Josh Johnson jumped in Norm Chow's shit about arguing about something instead of calling plays.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I watched like the first quarter, I think, and then I went to bed. It was too late for me.
LA is a interesting franchise because I think they have some pretty good talent, and we've seen flashes of them being a really good team, but we've also seen flashes of something's just not right. I mean, they were the team that after the first week of the season, they fired their defensive coordinator, and now 5 weeks in, that team that they played, that they were actually hanging with for a half that beat them, is the top scoring offense and the best team in the league. So, I mean, at the time it was like, oh man, they're taking this really seriously. They're not going to accept this. And then, 3 weeks ago, they come out on, a late game on Sunday and just thrashed DC and scored 39. I thought, hey, they finally got their stuff together. And the next week they come out and look awful in New York. And then last night, I was watching pieces of it, but Sunday nights, especially this time of year, I was playing Monopoly with the wife and trying to watch The Walking Dead for reasons that surpass logic and understanding. But just watching it, I'm like, what? There's no consistency because for a while, LA was getting blown out by Tampa Bay, and I thought, okay, well, obviously LA's completely fallen off. They rallied. I still think with Josh Johnson and Nelson Spruce and some of the pieces they have potential to be a great team. And the West is so wide open. That's why even Seattle at 1-4 and LA now, I think they're 2-3, who have looked tough at times, could come up and could challenge and could play, but it's a matter of getting it all together. Seattle's looked remarkably better since going to BJ Daniels. I think that was a good quarterback switch for them. I like Josh Johnson. Dallas, it's too bad trading's not a bigger thing, and it's the first year, because if they could just trade to get one of these quarterbacks that has fallen out of favor but might be a little bit better at running the system than what they've got in Philip Nelson, I still think Dallas with Cameron Artis-Payne and Lance Dunbar and some of the pieces they have could be in there. But it's been a weird season. I guess regular NFL football is like that too.
Yeah, key injuries can really bring you down, whether you're in the XFL or in the NFL, for sure. All right,
maybe they can get Dwayne Haskins some reps. Just send him to Dallas for 5 weeks.
Oh, come on now. Don't talk about my boy like that. Haskins is good. He's going to be all right this year. He needs a tight end, which, bada bing, bada boom. That's what we got on the list today. Tight ends.
They need to bring back Donald Parham.
I would not disagree with you. He's probably the best player on the Renegades team. So way to go, Dennis. Segueing even better than Matt did. So let's talk about the tight ends for free agency this year. There's not a lot of them. There's a couple guys. I mean, I actually kind of like everybody on this list outside of the two guys right in the middle of our list. But let's start off with Vance McDonald, who is obviously or was with Pittsburgh. There's a lot of people who thought he was going to have a really good season this past season. Now, some of that may have been because Big Ben went down and Mason Rudolph could not hit the broadside of a barn. But he just, regardless, did not have a good year. Did not have a good year the year before that. He's kind of been this darling sleeper for a lot of people for the past couple years and really has not done anything. We'll start with Dennis, since me and Matt did this last week with the quarterbacks. What are your thoughts on McDonald? Do you have a spot that you think he should go, or a spot where if he lands you think is going to improve his fantasy value as of right now?
McDonald he's turned into that perennial guy who flashes in a couple games and then ends up getting injured. I was in on McDonald. I love the Pittsburgh match. It may be in his best interest as a free agent to go back there. He's got Nick Vannett, Zach Gentry, Christian Williamson. It's not like there's a ton of competition there. I like Vannett too. He's spent a couple years on my wait to break out list, but never broke out. So, but McDonald has shown a lot of flashes. For him, it always seems to come down to health. And then with Ben out last year and the quarterback play in Pittsburgh, that really ended up being just a tough match for McDonald for his ability and the quarterback play there in Pittsburgh. So if I'm McDonald, I want to go back and take another run at it with Ben, in his swan song year. This could be a big opportunity to sit atop the depth chart and make a run at it.
What about you, Matt? What are your thoughts on Mr. Vance McDonald?
I mean, I don't think it'd be a bad idea to go back either. The question probably for me is more: Does Pittsburgh want him back? What kind of money is he looking for? I'm a little bit like Dennis. He's had promise, and every year seems like, this is going to be the year he's going to step up, he's going to do it, and you see flashes of it, and that's probably what makes it maddening. I think going into last year, we had seen him end 2018 a little bit strong. You saw Jesse James go to somewhere else, and it was like, hey, now it's his time, and it just has never totally happened. And I don't know even what they totally think of him, because wasn't the move to get Nick Vannett, didn't they make that as a trade in the middle of last year, pull him from Seattle?
Yes. Yeah, I think it was a week or two before the trade deadline last year they gave up. I don't even remember what it was. It wasn't a high pick. I want to say maybe it was a 4th or 5th rounder, but they did give up the pick to get Vannett right around the trade deadline.
But that's kind of Pittsburgh's thing. They're not going to usually splash out big, huge things and make runs at players like that, so it's not super surprising. But I think it's going to come down to whether they saw enough in McDonald that they want to bring him back. To me, he's not a top tier free agent even at this position. He's probably a 2nd tier or a 3rd tier. He wouldn't surprise me as a guy that makes his signing post draft when we see where tier 1 and where the rookies land.
Yeah, I just with McDonald, it's really about, did he mesh with the team? Vannett, I think, with teams running so much two tight end, McDonald is a little more athletic than Vannett, but he's a capable blocker, and Vannett's a good blocker, and he's a good receiver as well. So when you have two tight ends that play well, they become essentially interchangeable. I think that helps your offense to, keep some variability. You can't you're not just telegraphing it. So having McDonald back, I think if, maybe somebody comes in and blows him away. I agree with Matt. I think he's probably bottom of the second tier, middle of the second tier of free agent tight ends. I would like to, like I said, I'd like to see him there. I don't think he's going to be up for a 75 catch season, but he can certainly improve on his 40 catch season from last year.
Where would you guys rank him fantasy wise? Obviously we don't know any of the draft tight ends. There's at least, I would say, 4 or 5 tight ends in the draft that we all think could be interesting for fantasy, depending on where they land. And there's a huge list of teams that need tight ends. So we'll get to that in a minute. But where would you guys rank McDonald without knowing the draft tight ends if he were to go back to Pittsburgh? Is he kind of any shot that he falls into right around the 12 range, or do you think he's outside that and definitely a tier 2 tight end?
I'd put him somewhere. I think somewhere between tight end 10 and 15 is within the range of outcomes. But I think somewhere between tight end 25 and 35 is within the range of outcomes as well.
Yeah, that's kind of me. I would put him in the tight end 15 to 20, which would be a
that'd be a low end tight end.
Tight end too.
Yeah, it's still not bad. I mean, the tight end position altogether is kind of bad outside of the top guys. So I'm going to mix it up here, and let's talk about one of the top guys, Austin Hooper. We know that he was having a phenomenal year last year with Atlanta. He was a tight end 1 for most of the season until he got hurt. There's a lot of rumors about him possibly going to New England because we know New England has always had a really good offense when they've had a really good tight end. And they haven't had that since Gronk retired. So do you guys think any shot he goes to New England? Do you hope he goes back to Atlanta? And regardless, wherever he lands, is he still, since he's proven can be a top 5 tight end, do you think he stays a top 5 tight end regardless of where he goes, or does he have to go to an explosive offense? We'll go Matt first on this one.
So I think reading the tea leaves, it seems unlikely he's going back to Atlanta just based on the things they've said. That feels like that would have been still a really good fit. Obviously has chemistry with Matt Ryan, and he fit into that system of what they were trying to do. I think New England could potentially be awesome. The one, he's been linked to a couple other teams. Washington, I'm not incredibly high on their current quarterback project, but they've had some success with tight ends there. We've obviously seen what a tight end like Greg Olsen did on a team coached by Ron Rivera. So, there's some potential there. The one that scares me the most is he's been linked heavily to Green Bay. And we have seen time and again the Green Bay Packers just suck all the joy out of a tight end fantasy prospect by signing them. Never have they made one of these big tight end signings work with Aaron Rodgers, no matter who the coach was. The last one they tried was Jimmy Graham, and there was there's times where you had a game where you were like, hey, maybe Jimmy Graham will be relevant. And then you start him for 3 weeks and look at the 2 points you had over that time span and wonder what happened to your life. That's probably the one that scares me the most. And in that sense, I don't think you can say with certainty that Austin Hooper is a tight end 1 no matter where he goes. The other thing that I think about is somebody like Eric Ebron, who always had a lot of talent, where I'm sure we're going to talk about him in a minute, when he was with Detroit, makes that move to the Colts. And for 1 year, you're like, hey, this is what we were hoping. He's made it. A lot of people made moves to get him. And then if you were riding him last year, that was a pitiful experience. I think tight end, you need to see guys do it time and again, and it helps to have consistency in their situation. Look at the 3 lead pipe locks that we have at tight end. Kelsey, Kittle, and Ertz, guys who have done it for more than 1 year, who are staying consistent in a system. And, have somewhat of an offense built around them. Aside from that, I don't know if you can say with certainty that anyone maintains tight end one no matter what year to year, because we even saw with Jimmy Graham, who looked like an otherworldly player at that position when he was in New Orleans, go to Seattle, which seemed like at the time that would be a fairly ideal fit and could be a great situation, and it never materialized the way you wanted. And you think about what Jimmy Graham is now versus what he was 6 years ago, and it's hard to believe it's even the same player.
Yeah, I think for me, there are some teams that need tight ends out there that Hooper could really help, and it's just sorting through the question marks. I would love to see Hooper somewhere where he's going to get lots of opportunity and not a ton of competition. So maybe the Bears. The downside there is the quarterback. What's going to happen there? Another great opportunity could be the Houston Texans. So they don't have, they've got Kahali Waring and then some older, more blocking oriented vets. That's someplace that Hooper could step right in and really fill a role there that, he's more athletic than Fells was, and it could end up being a really nice fit, especially given some of the challenges they've had at their second wide receiver position, to end up with a tight end that can be a reliable producer like that. Probably the one place that I look at and think that maybe, just maybe, it could be the spot that vaults him into the, tight end 5 range is the Jacksonville Jaguars. They don't have he's not going to get beat out by Nick O'Leary. Minshew is he's got that Brett Favre-ian gunslinger mentality, despite not really having the arm that Favre has. He's willing to get out there and get around and make things happen. Foles had the tight ends up in Philadelphia, so he knows how to use a tight end. And Jacksonville could use a tight end, so that might be a really interesting fit that would really maintain his status.
So I take it you are not a believer in Josh Oliver at tight end? I mean, he had a lot of hype coming out of the draft last year.
It's not that I'm not a believer. It's that I am a believer that in the rare exception is the early production tight end. Mm-hmm. So give me Oliver to be my backup for the next couple years, and then let's see what happens in 2022 when Oliver's had an opportunity to develop like a normal tight end develops in the NFL.
Or, Foles came from a system where they were able to utilize 2 tight ends in Goddard and Ertz and have that work out really well. You had Ertz there for a long time, and they've slowly been bringing Goddard up. I mean, I could see a situation where you had Hooper and Oliver working there, and in a couple of years, there are teams that do a lot with 2 tight ends. The Patriots, for a while, when they were really cooking on offense, used 2 tight ends, Gronkowski and a tight end that we won't mention by name. But, I mean, teams can make that work with their talent, depending on what they want to do.
Yeah, I think Hooper, there's 2 of them on this list really for me that are really interesting. That's Hooper and Henry, because I wouldn't be surprised if neither one of them came back. And I think those are the 2, at least on the list that we have here, that probably have the most fantasy implications for 2020. Like they could really kind of help out your team, especially if they went to a really good offense. I would do either one of you.
Chargers are talking about franchise tagging Henry, though. Seems like they're certainly going to do that after signing Eckler. They've decided to let Gordon go.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it'd be a bad thing. How's the saying go? Tight end's a rookie quarterback's best friend, and the chances are, it's either going to be Tyrod or a rookie quarterback. So,
well, it might be the same thing.
That's true. Good point. I watched Tyrod play in Cleveland, so I can't disagree with you on that. If he were to go to New England, which does seem to be the hot name that has been kind of connected to him a lot, Would that boost his stock up? And Matt, I know you were saying that he wouldn't be like the tight end one, but would you think he probably goes or sits around the tight end top 5 if he ends up in New England, knowing, again, there's still a lot of questions about who's going to be the quarterback and what system they're going to run, but it does always seem that they've really like to use at least one, if not 2 tight ends like you were mentioning. Do you think that boosts his fantasy stock at all if he goes to New England?
Well, I think the big unknown there is the passer. You figure the scheme's going to stay pretty much the same. Josh McDaniels locked in, has done pretty much the same thing for a long time. So schematically and opportunity-wise, it seems like it would be a fit, especially for a team who has a dubious wide receiver situation and running situation at best. But, we both talked on Thursday that we don't think Jarrett Stidham's the guy that's going to get the job, but who is getting the job, I could see Austin Hooper being a wonderful weapon with Tom Brady coming back, or you get a guy like Rivers, or you get one of these veteran guys. Andy Dalton's obviously somebody you just mentioned who has had some success throwing to a tight end who can be a weapon like Eifert. So, that I think that would still keep him in, for me, the tight end one conversation going into the draft because of what we saw him do and because he lands in a favorable situation. But that, there are a lot of places that need a tight end that could be appealing. One of the ones Dennis hit on, Houston, you're getting an awesome quarterback. Jacksonville, could be Foles, could be Gardner Minshew. Chicago could be Trubisky, could be, Tannehill, could be somebody else that they bring in to compete. There's a lot of situations where they need a tight end, but you also aren't 100% sure what you're going to see offense production wise. And, he was lucky. In Atlanta, they were a predominantly pass offense, a pass first offense. He had good rapport with his quarterback, Matt Ryan, and you knew pretty solidly what you were going to get from Matt Ryan. There are elements of that situation that aren't 100% replicatable at all these other places. And there are places like I mentioned with Green Bay, where you have a great quarterback, but you have never seen that position kind of seamlessly fit into the offensive game plan. Could it? Sure. We've hoped it was going to happen with several prominent signings that haven't. So he's going to be the most interesting domino, I think, at this position free agency wise, since it seems pretty certain that the Chargers are going to franchise tag Henry and try to keep him.
Dennis, any thoughts on Hooper possibly landing with New England?
It would be a good fit if we are looking at, everything lining up, like Brady being back and him being able to produce. I think he has to. There's definitely a expected drop in production when a wide receiver changes teams. So I haven't heard anybody talk, and I haven't looked myself to see, well, when a pass catching tight end changes teams, do they experience the same kind of drop in production that a wide receiver does? I would, without, digging through the numbers or having a numbers guy tell me, I would expect a drop in production from a pass catching tight end going to a new team. So he's likely to lose some production anyways. It's going to be, I would think New England would be a good fit for him, though. They know how to use a tight end with his skills.
Yeah, I think Cooper and Henry, who we were just talking about a minute ago as well, with Matt bringing up he might be franchised by the Chargers. With their skill sets, I feel like wherever they go, they're going to be fantasy relevant. The other guys, I feel like it's really going to be dependent on the offenses. Obviously, if maybe... I was going to say Tennessee, but Tennessee made Delaney Walker a really good tight end for a long time, even though they've been run heavy for a very long time. So I really think those two, regardless of where they go, are going to have some sort of fantasy relevance. Maybe not those top 5 to 10 guys like we have hoped for a very long time, especially with Henry, where he's shown the flashes and then hasn't due to injury and everything else going on in his career. But I think both of those guys are still, at least right now, you can't sell them for anything less than top 12 tight ends because they've proven that they can do it, and I think they could do it in any system. Matt, you keep bringing up the fact that the Chargers are talking about franchise tagging Henry. Assuming they do that, what does that do for you guys with him moving forward? We know that they're likely going to have a rookie quarterback at some point. It looks like all signs are pointing toward Tyrod Taylor, at least being the starter at first. And then I would not be surprised if he ends up kind of getting like that 2017, 2018 season of the Cleveland Browns where he plays for a couple games and then ends up getting benched for the rookie. So what are your thoughts on Henry being there? Because again, the saying goes tight ends are a rookie quarterback's best friend, but he also has two really good wide receivers in Keenan Allen and Mike Williams on the outside. And as you mentioned, they also re-signed Eckler, who's a really good receiving back out of the backfield as well. So Dennis, do you think him coming or possibly staying with the Chargers and having a rookie quarterback changes his value at all for the Chargers?
Well, I think a rookie quarterback always changes the potential outcomes because they're rookies and it's just not a situation you can count on for someone to just drop in as a rookie and perform like, a 15-year vet like Phillip Rivers. So, yeah, it'll have some effect. Tyrod Taylor has been a career backup for a reason as well. So I still, for me, I want Higbee to stay in Los Angeles with the Chargers. Let them draft, a lot of mocks keep putting Justin Herbert there. I think you've got the two wide receivers. You've got, the tight end. Bring in the rookie quarterback. Give him a few games to get his feet under him in the NFL. Let Tyrod start unless Herbert steps in and basically just takes the job. But you've got a decent running back with Austin Eckler. They paid him to be a committee back. He's going to produce some good numbers. You got Justin Jackson. If they don't bring him along as the second back, they'll bring in another veteran and split the carries with Eckler, so Eckler can put up another 70 catch season or something good like that. So the coaching staff is all the same. The offensive system is all the same. So in that case, you've got only one person really that needs to learn the offense, and all these other guys around him that can help him and help put Herbert in a position to be successful. So for me, as a Tyler Higbee owner, I want Higbee to stay in L.A.
I think you mean Hunter Henry.
Yeah, him too.
Matt, your thoughts on
I'm sure the Rams are keeping Higbee, so
yeah,
I gotta worry about him. I think the question, Chargers are not a bad landing spot to me for all the reasons Dennis kind of talked about. I think it's interesting if they're going to franchise tag him. They're probably obviously hoping to make him part of their long-term plans. We just saw them kind of make a commitment to Eckler. I had written a little earlier in the offseason looking at the Chargers that this was going to be a really interesting offseason for kind of making over their offense in a lot of ways. Obviously made the decision that they're ready to move on from Phillip Rivers. Keenan Allen is in a contract year. An interesting question about, what are they going to do beyond that point? I think Williams this is his fourth year. And so they're getting close to a decision point there. Obviously they with all their running backs kind of coming up, they made a decision on Eckler. Franchise tagging Henry would suggest that they've seen enough that they want to have that anchor there. I think the question for Hunter Henry in part has always been, can he stay on the field? Because they ended up keeping, I think, Antonio Gates a season or two more than they wanted to, just because they could never, because they had such bad luck with Henry, and tearing an ACL before a season last year, kind of getting that injury, getting knocked out when he seemed to be getting things going. But when he was there playing, he was playing pretty well. I have several shares in Dynasty. I keep hoping, that we're going to see him. We've seen, even on his own team, Keenan Allen was a guy who had talent and who had flashes, who had a couple of years of real bad injury luck, who was able to kind of right that ship and be what we hoped he would be. I think the Chargers are hoping they can see the same thing with Hunter Henry, and that he is probably a good fit, whether you have a rookie quarterback or Tyrod Taylor. I think those short to intermediate routes are the ones that are going to get peppered a little bit more. I've been interested too. People have talked about thinking that the Chargers may actually be targeting Tua, hoping that they can try to get him and have him sit for a year and let Taylor play and then have him take over. I thought that was kind of an interesting possibility too. So quarterback play is going to be a little bit of a question, although not as big a concern for me. I think him being able to stay on the field, and then the fact that he's among 4 people who are going to be competing for targets, that's always kind of a rough, you like what really separates the top tier of tight ends from the next tier of tight ends is that guaranteed target share, that guaranteed role in the offense. I don't think we've seen Henry be able to complete a season to where you get a sense of what his guaranteed role would be week in, week out.
Yeah, I kind of agree with everything both of you guys are saying. I don't have much to add there. I mean, I think regardless if he stays there or if he goes somewhere else, I think he's going to be fine. His biggest thing is going to be staying on the field. Obviously, me being as big of a Herbert fan as I am, I'd love for him to be with the Chargers if they do draft Herbert, because I think giving him all those weapons is finally going to be able to kind of show the world just how good Herbert is, and I do think he could have a really good year with them. But I do kind of agree with what you were saying, Matt, there, and him having to compete for targets with some of those guys might lessen some of his fantasy value as well. But if he can do, I want to say, whatever his last almost full season was healthy, where he was just kind of like a red zone monster, where he didn't really get a lot of catches or yards, he just got a ton of touchdowns. I mean, if he can do that, I mean, it's going to hurt Allen and Williams' value some, but if you don't own either one of them, you just have Hunter Henry, you're going to be fine with that. So I think regardless of where he goes, him and Hooper are the two, as I mentioned earlier, that I think could really still be decent for you fantasy-wise, regardless of what teams they go to. And we'll give a rundown of all the teams, at least I think. I'll see if you guys agree with me, that are tight end needy here in just a minute. We got 3 more guys to talk about. The last guy that I think is really interesting, in my opinion, is Eric Ebron. Dennis has dealt with his, bad play in Detroit for a long time, goes to Indianapolis, has a phenomenal year, then really kind of regresses right back to the means the year after. The Indianapolis Colts move on from him. Jack Doyle seems to be back and fully healthy. He's going to be their main tight end, so Ebron goes into free agency. Where is the best fit for you, Dennis, that you think Ebron could go to and maybe not reestablish himself as that top 5 tight end that he was that first year in Indy, but at least a top 10 tight end for fantasy needs?
North Carolina to finish his degree.
Ouch. All right. Matt, what about you? Any love for Eric Ebron?
I really liked what I saw from Ebron with Andrew Luck and the way he fit in that offense in 2018. I understand Dennis's feelings and pain when you watch a player on your team that's highly touted, and the place where they drafted, wasn't Ebron a first-round draft pick for Detroit?
Yep.
Like a high first-round draft pick. When you take somebody, there's a certain level of expectation that if they never can live up to and deliver on that, it can be really frustrating, especially when you see him the first year out. But really, we cling to, as fantasy people, I think, the 2018 season saying, see, this is what we always said he can be, and we just need to get the right spot. But that, if you really look at his career, has been the outlier. And so who is Eric Ebron? And I'm somebody that got caught up in the hype. Of course, this was before Luck retired, and actually made a good trade to rely on him at tight end last year, thinking it was going to be a piece to get me into a playoff run, and ended up screwing myself. I'm ashamed to even tell you what I traded. I basically traded Miles Sanders and Arcega-Whiteside for Aaron Jones and Eric Ebron, which it wasn't terrible, but I thought it was going to put me in the playoffs, and it decidedly didn't. So now it feels more terrible. But a lot of the places Dennis mentioned earlier are places you could see him go. A Jacksonville could be interesting. What about a Dallas? Obviously, they're ready to move on from Jason Witten. I don't know that I think Blake Jarwin, in the limited samples we've seen, is the answer. Tight end, when Dallas has been good, they've always had kind of a reliable tight end. And even though Jason Witten wasn't like a sexy pick even last year, he was reliably around a startable tight end all season just because of the targets and the way they play football. So I think that's kind of a secret hidden spot that I don't hear a lot of people talking about this offseason. That would be a good place for one of these tight ends to land to get kind of a comfortable role, especially somebody who's decent in the red zone, which we saw that was probably Ebron's biggest upside in 2018. He was somebody that was a big target that could be reliably looked upon in the end zone. I think that's something Dak would like. So that's kind of a fit where I would be curious to see what he could do in that system.
I don't think you can count on Ebron's 2018. I mean, he had 13 touchdowns in 2018, and he's had 14 touchdowns in his other, 5 seasons combined. So I think it doesn't matter where he goes. I think you got to kiss that goodbye. Ebron is, he is what he is. He's a big slot player. He isn't going to give you a lot in the blocking. And if you have a smart quarterback, maybe you can get some relatively consistent production out of him. But I don't think you're going to get another, 13 touchdown season out of him.
Right. So say he goes to, Matt, you mentioned Dallas. I don't know. I guess it would depend on how much Ebron's wanting, because I know with all the free agents they have, Dallas doesn't have a ton of cap space available. But what if he were to, say, go to a Dallas, I'm trying to think of where, Arizona or Houston? Would that intrigue you guys if he were to land on any one of those teams, or even all three teams?
Not me.
Yeah, you have to define intrigue because, I think Dennis and I are both saying the same thing. 2018 is an outlier. If that's what you think you're going to get, you're never, in my opinion, you're never seeing that again. He's not a guy who I'm saying is a lock for a tight end 1, but I think he could be a top tier tight end 2, maybe fringe tight end 1, if he can stay healthy and he ends up in the right situation where he gets those that's why I brought up kind of what we saw from Witten last year. Mm-hmm. Nobody felt good putting him in their starting lineup, but he got you usually enough points to not kill you at a position that feels like it's incredibly boom or bust at times.
Yeah, Witten was tight end 11 last year.
Yeah, wow. So fringe tight end 1 if you're in a 12-team league or a 10-team league.
All right, well, what about fringe tight end 1, Jason Witten? It does not look like he's coming back to the Dallas Cowboys. Are we assuming he's going to retire? I believe he came out and said he wants to play for at least one more year. So if he does play, do we have any interest in him whatsoever?
I'm likely avoiding him.
Yeah.
I expect he's probably going to do something like go on a fairly cheap deal to someplace like New York. They just had Ellison retire. He's familiar with the team, and Ingram has issues with staying healthy. So, he can pop in there as the backup, get some decent production opportunities. He's 6 yards and a 6 yard out in a cloud of dust kind of guy now. But.
Yeah. I'm kind of with Dennis. I think the most likely feels like the Giants. From a dynasty perspective, given his age and limited, that's not somebody you're making any kind of move toward. Personally, I do hope he gets to play another year, if only to keep him out of the broadcast booth.
All right, last guy on the list who I think can be somewhat intriguing. We saw some good seasons out of him in Cincinnati with the Red Rifle when he could stay healthy. Is Tyler Eifert, I guess really kind of the same thing as Jason Witten. Does he make you are you guys excited about him at all if he lands even like say Houston, a team that we've really kind of been talking about on here who really needs a tight end? If he were to land with the Houston, where do you guys kind of think he might land fantasy wise? Again, we have to assume health because he's not proven that he can stay healthy for a full season.
I think he's going to land on IR. I mean, he's the evil Knievel of tight ends, man. I think he's broken every bone in his body.
Yeah, I have trouble even putting him at a tight end 2 slot because you just don't know what you're going to get. When he's on in a game, he can get you like 7 receptions for 100 yards and 3 touchdowns. And you're like, I've got my guy. And that's all he has for the rest of the season. So, that is another guy I would have trouble giving any kind of assets or pinning any kind of hopes on at this point in time.
Yeah, he's going to go somewhere. He's going to probably be the tight end 2 somewhere with an opportunity to win a starting job just based on his veteran status. But I don't think he's going to, do a whole lot. If I'm him, I'd try to cut a deal and stay in Cincinnati and back up Drew Sample and let them bring this young quarterback in, see what this new head coach is doing, and who knows, maybe catch a wave over the next year or two and get some playoff time.
Oh my God, do you think the Bengals are making the playoffs? This might be the biggest revelation you've.
Joe Cool, man. Joe Cool. They got a nice team around him.
This time of year, anybody could make it.
It's true.
All right, so real quick, there's not really a whole lot more to talk about with tight end. What is the best landing spot for you guys? There's a couple teams that stick out off the top of my head that I think would be really good in New England, Pittsburgh, and Houston. Are any one of those a top team for you guys? Is a different team? Who would be the best landing spot for you guys overall for a tight end to go in this free agency window here in 2020?
Take it, Matt.
Well, I think Dennis made a real strong case for Jacksonville. Kind of got me excited about that as a possibility. I still think Dallas is a potentially interesting spot because they've, have a long and storied history of using the tight end, and I think that would fit some of the skill set and some of the offensive pieces they have. New England, depending on the quarterback situation, is definitely one I like. Houston, I want to like, but there's something about it that I don't know if
Bill
Houston
O'Brien
is somewhat similar to Green Bay in that they have awesome quarterback and they seem to have awesome wide receiver and want to pass and don't know how to use all their positions. And you were definitely correct, Bill O'Brien, but he says he's not calling the plays this year. So I guess we'll see, but those are probably a few. Washington, I think, could potentially be good. There's another case where we're talking about a young quarterback, a coach who we've seen that is comfortable using the tight end position. So I think there's a lot of potential in some of those spots.
For me, the place I'm most interested in seeing a tight end land, especially an athletic tight end that has some pass receiving chops, is Arizona.
Okay.
That's a team that they have a mishmash of wide receivers. No, they don't have a bona fide number one. I love Larry, but he's one step ahead of Julian Edelman.
Yeah.
And Christian Kirk could be the guy. I like Kirk a lot, but he still has a lot to prove. And then the rest of it is a bunch of guys. They drafted 4 receivers last year.
Yep.
I think they're going to draft a couple more this year. Some talk about CD Lamb going there. But if one of the tight ends could end up there, they've got a tight end, Caleb Wilson out of UCLA.
Yes, that's correct.
Who's big, athletic, fast. Potentially, maybe he breaks out. Maybe they bring somebody in. Maybe they come in. They're able to snake Hooper or Henry away. I'd love to see Austin Hooper land in Arizona. I think that would be fantastic. But that's a team with that offense and the way they're opening it up and throwing so heavily. That could be fantasy gold.
I like that call. I did not have Arizona near the top of my list there. Are we all in agreement that Chicago is probably the worst spot for a tight end to fall on this list?
I don't know about the worst.
It's a bad
really
spot.
Depends.
Yeah.
Well, who would be worse?
Is Chicago a bad spot, or was Trey Burton not what people thought he was going to be?
He's what I thought he was going to be. I think there was issue with Chicago right now is Mitch.
I think the play calling has a pretty big part to do with it as well.
Yeah,
That's just my opinion.
I could sign on to that as well. When you combine the play calling with Mitch, then it's not it's not a fantasy winner for tight ends.
But Chicago's another place where you kind of have to, I think, see how the offseason shakes out in terms of quarterbacks, because I still firmly believe that one of those kind of second-tier free agent quarterbacks is going to end up there, because I still think that Chicago is one of many teams that saw what Tennessee was able to do by pushing a young quarterback that they hadn't gotten the most out of, and are going to look at that market for quarterbacks and snap up one of those guys and say, if it's not working, we're making a change. And that could potentially change a lot of things. In Tennessee, we saw, it didn't help Corey Davis because maybe he's a lost cause, but A.J. Brown certainly seemed to benefit from that. We saw John Smith take a little bit of a step up from that. Derrick Henry seemed to run better after that. So there are a lot of things that can change in an offense that you don't even necessarily think about when you can get even just to a level of competence or confidence in the quarterback, and that includes the players in those positions having confidence in the guy who's back there taking the snaps.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to lie, I kind of hope you're wrong on that. I just drafted Mitch Trubisky in the 6th round of a Superflex League as my second quarterback, so I kind of need him to show out here. I had to.
6th round?
It was a 16-teamer, man.
You better get that Mitch Trubisky tattoo over your heart.
It's a 16-teamer. I mean, he was like one of the last ones left. It was either him or Tom Brady, and I'm just hoping for his legs this year, I guess, is all I want. I mean, trust me, this draft it's not going well for me, boys. I made some mistakes. I'm not going to lie about that.
Did you trade Miles Sanders for Eric Ebron?
I did not do that, so I can hold my head high.
And I think
that.
You're doing better.
I would never trade Miles Sanders. He is the other one he's another player that I tried to adopt who denied me as well, much like Tyree Jackson. And the love's still there. I love me some Miles Sanders. That's my boy, right there with Phillip Lindsay as well.
Maybe the Bears can get Tyree Jackson because it can't be any worse.
It's debatable. But real quick, before we cut out of here, there was a free agent move that I think changed two things for fantasy. So I do want to touch on that. It happened earlier in the year. I don't think it can be official yet, obviously, until a new league year starts. But Greg Olsen is signing with the Seattle Seahawks, which obviously hurts Will Dissly's fantasy value, in my opinion, but also raises up Ian Thomas. Thomas was a guy that Dennis was on last year thinking he'd take a step up. Now he's got that shot. Let's start with Thomas because he's got the upside. What are you guys thinking of Thomas and his possible fantasy outlook for 2020? I'll let Dennis go first since that's his boy.
I love Ian Thomas, especially with Cam coming back. He's only had some limited opportunities because of Olsen, but in 6 starts in 2018, he put up 36 receptions with 2 touchdowns. And in 3 starts, he had 16 receptions with a touchdown last year, backing up Olsen. So he's shown that the game isn't too big for him. So I want to see him get an opportunity to take the next step. He's coming into year 3. It's a perfect time for tight ends to take that step. He'll have, so far it seems like he's going to have his quarterback that he's comfortable with back, the guy that knows the offense there. So they should be pretty cohesive. So I'm all on board the Ian Thomas train.
I'm cautiously optimistic too. I would say I wouldn't have confidence that any of them know the offense exactly, since they're changing coaches and schemes, even though some of the people might be familiar. But right now, if I was pressed, I'd probably have them in the 12 to 15 rank, fringe tight end 1 based on hopes and the samples we've seen seems like a great opportunity. So that's that's probably the best, is cautiously optimistic, because I have him in a couple of places where I could really use him developing into a reliable starting tight end.
Yeah, I have him and Henry on a 16-team tight end premium, start 2 tight ends. So
could be a good year for you. Yeah, I'm high on Thomas this year too. He's a guy that I think could really take a step forward, especially having Samuel and DJ Moore with Christian McCaffrey, all those explosive weapons on the outside. Cam coming back, hopefully fully healthy. I love the offense that Matt Rule ran at Temple and at Baylor. I think he can be really good for the NFL. So if Ian Thomas is going to be that tight end and maybe that kind of short outlet for Cam Newton, I think he could have a great year. So I'm excited about him in Carolina. And then Greg Olsen, he goes to Seattle, signed, I believe it was just a 1-year deal. So that might be more just to make sure Will Dissly comes back fully healthy. But in my opinion, that means you cannot expect much for Will Dissly this year. So what are your thoughts on both of those guys? Are they just kind of both avoids for the 2020 season? And then Will Dissly firing back up in 2021? What are your guys' takes on those? We'll start with you, Matt.
Well, Dissly's a guy I'm obviously still holding in Dynasty because I think we've seen some great flashes. They're talking about doing a 2 tight end offense. I mean, you could see some of that happening. They have a lot of questions, obviously, about running back and running back health and what's going to happen there. Sometimes the short passing game can be a substitute for missing some stuff in the running game. I think there's obviously some concerns about Dissly coming back and his durability, because it's 2 years in a row we've seen major injuries, kind of like what we've seen with Hunter Henry. You almost feel a little bit like this Greg Olsen signing is a little bit like when the Chargers brought back Gates for 1 more year, because they have hope, but they also aren't 100% sure. But Greg Olsen, he could be a decent fit there. Too, we obviously saw, even after Dissly went out, some value for tight ends in that system. Hollister had a nice little run in there at times for Seattle. That's a position that they'd like to be able to use when their offense is going well. So I think there's value for those guys, but they definitely both take a hit. If you were hoping that Dissly maybe could come back, stay healthy, and move into that tight end 1 range, I think they're both going to end up being somewhere around tight end 2 or 3.
Yeah, it's a tough situation. I think if Olsen stays healthy, he's a consummate professional, and I think he's going to provide Russell Wilson with probably a more reliable option than he's had it consistently in the past. Dissly will be coming back off the injury. I think that there's no reason for them to rush him. And so if I'm going to have one of them, I probably want Olsen to start this year, but I want to also use the early part of the season as an opportunity to buy Will Dissly.
All right, well, that about covers it for us today for the tight ends. By this time next week, we will be in the legal tampering period, which makes absolutely no sense because nothing is legal about tampering, and tampering is not legal. So I don't understand that wording at all by the NFL, but it is legal tampering. So we might actually hear some news about some players. We obviously got the Josh Norman news today. But if we see or hear anything, we'll talk about that on next Monday's episode. Otherwise, we'll be talking about the top wide receivers and running backs, which should be a fun episode to kind of get into. Just a quick, I forgot the word I wanted to use there, so now I'm trying to fill, and I'm not going to remember it. Not bookkeeping, whatever. We're not going to have a Thursday podcast this week. I'll just go ahead and say that. I get to go to the doctor and get an MRI done on my knee this Thursday, so we will not be doing a podcast, but me and Dennis will be back on Friday to talk about our rookie wide receivers, and then I will actually be having a podcast going up on Saturday as well. I have a special guest joining me to talk about some Devy stuff from the Devy Delight podcast, part of the Expand the Box Score, their podcasting network, so I'm excited to bring him on there. So Matt will be back with us next Monday, and then along with Dennis, but you will hear me and Dennis again on Friday. Dennis, Matt, thank you guys both so much for joining me today, and I look forward to talking to you guys again soon. Have yourselves a great day.
Right on, and wash your hands, jackasses.
Have a great week.
Prepare for glory!
I want to know if you got your popcorn ready. Do you got your popcorn ready?
I came out the womb, I was ready.
And he's hit the end zone for an unbelievable touchdown.
I would be honored if you played football for this team.
Throw it up above his head. They can't jump with me. Golly. Oh, they tackle him at the 40-yard line.
Who can make a play? I can. Who can make a play? I can.
Keep the devices in your home protected from Wi-Fi threats with Xfinity XFi. If it's connected, it's protected. Now that's simple, easy, awesome. Switch to Xfinity today and get a great offer. You'll get fast speeds and the best in-home Wi-Fi experience with Xfinity XFi. And now you can get advanced security for free when you get the XFi Gateway. That's a $72 value per year. Go to Xfinity.com, call 1-800-XFINITY, or visit an Xfinity store to switch today. Restrictions apply.
5 Hour Energy helps you get through your crazy on-the-go life. And now it comes in 2 great tropical flavors, strawberry banana and tropical burst. They're delicious and can transport you to a tropical paradise. Try them both, then vote for your favorite at 5hewin.com. You could be on the go to someplace you actually want to go. Offer ends 7/31/20. Terms apply. See www.5hewin.com for details.